Welcome back. Hope everyone got a little break and a little networking in and are ready for our keynote speaker. And I was thinking keynote's not a big enough word for this speaker. Now he told me already, he said 10 seconds is too long. I've already overdone that. But good gracious, actually worked for 3 of our armed services, was a J2 3 times. Actually ran 3 combat support agencies, if you count NEMA and NGA. I'm doing it. So there you go. Undersecretary, and now the DNI, actually his collective time as our DNI is now greater than the collective time of all the other DNIs. So a long way to say, he's quite experienced. He has a different word for it and he can use it, but he's very experienced and he's going to share some of that with us here today. So please help me in joining our DNI Director, Jim Clapper.
Well, thanks, Robert, for a great introduction, mainly because it was short. It's really great to be back here at Georgetown. It's not only the oldest Jesuit, but the oldest Catholic institute of higher learning in the United States. Today I'm happy anyone actually stayed on campus to talk about intelligence and national security rather than joining the crowds downtown, trying to catch the attention of the Pope. And also glad I'm not caught in the traffic down there. Being back on the hilltop is a bit of a homecoming for me and someone you'll meet a little later, Hannah Powell. In 2006, after almost 5 years as in Robert's job, I taught here at Georgetown Security Studies program as a the distinguished professor in the practice of intelligence, which is a far more impressive title than I taught, I think, but anyway, it was a nice title. And my classes met in the ICC, usually after I'd always had a warm-up trip to the tombs. And from my time teaching here, I believe that the IC and the Jesuit academic community actually have a lot in common. And my students here 9 years ago, and the IC employees whom I've spent about 5 decades working with, all have in common an intense desire to understand the world and then to share their knowledge to help others understand, which is certainly, I'm sure you've heard this, certainly a hallmark of NGA, which is probably, I think, the most transparent component of the intelligence community. Anyway, I think that explanation, that kinship, may be why we have so many Georgetown graduates in the intelligence community. And knowing there's a contingent of a couple of some students here in the room, and I believe some of our future leaders in national security may be here this morning. So anyway, thanks very much for having me today and spend some time with you. So I have, as you can tell, some prepared remarks, which I'd like to share with you, and then I think we'll get to questions, which I always enjoy, those kind of interactions. I'm going to ask Hannah to come up here and help me answer them. So the conference theme here is Succeeding in the Open, which is very timely, since the IC has become much more transparent in the past few years. Some would say we were dragged kicking and screaming, but that's, and maybe that was a good thing. And we've also, I think, been more successful operating in the open. But I think it is a good question to ask, have we been more successful because of or in spite of operating in the open? I think this morning I understand that Robert and his superb deputy, Sue Gordon, both talked about how our ability to share imagery has benefited mission. And as in 2013, when we showed that Syria had used chemical weapons on its own people, something when Robert was a part of ODNI, he was very much involved in. And in explaining it, not doing it, I should make that clear. And in 2014, when we helped make a public diplomatic case against Russia for obfuscating what happened to Malaysian airliner Flight 17 over the Ukraine. So Robert and Sue also discussed how we shared imagery to help people in need, with the Ebola outbreak in West Africa and then the earthquake in Nepal. And these are ways we benefited from conscious transparency. And at the same time, we're also operating more in the open because a few people who didn't fully understand the classified information they had decided on their own to go public with it. And that trend continues, by the way, unfortunately. A couple weeks ago at AFCEA, the Armed Forces Communications Electronics Association, and INSA, the Intelligence and Security Association Summit, I mentioned a critical intelligence program that was revealed by the documents that Mr. Snowden stole and released. And the program that was compromised was the single most important source of force protection and warning for our people in Afghanistan. And so a journalist wrote about it, and WikiLeaks published any details that they missed. And the very next day after the revelation in the media, the government of Afghanistan shut this program down, specifically President Karzai himself. And we lost a lot of our ability to protect and warn people on the ground, which we have yet to fully replicate. So I don't want to dwell too much on this. Last time I spoke here with Hannah a year and a half ago, I talked a good bit about how Snowden's theft and leaks have hurt national security, and about why Snowden, at least in my book, is not a whistleblower. And I did give an example of someone I consider a legitimate whistleblower, who's Sergeant Joe Darby, who blew the lid on the abuses at Abu Ghraib. And you can look him up, Joe Darby, up on your smartphones on the next break. But today I'd rather talk about a transparency event that I participated in last week. Something that had been in the works for about 6.5 years. Last week in Austin, Texas, at the LBJ Presidential Library, CIA rolled out 2,500 declassified documents. These were President's daily briefings from the era of President Johnson's administration and from President Kennedy's. And the PDB, of course, the President's Daily Brief, is the absolute apex of intelligence reporting. It's the IC's daily dialogue with the President for addressing global challenges and opportunities related to national security. In fact, I came here from such a session this morning in the White House. It's among the most highly classified and sensitive documents in all of government. But it started as a simple intelligence news bulletin with President Kennedy, who felt he was missing important intelligence because he didn't know when reports were arriving or when to expect updates. So the CIA began bringing him a small packet. One would fit in his shirt pocket with the intel highlights of the day. I wish we could get everything in a shirt pocket thing today, but we can't. Anyway, he had a few cards, and would fit in the president's shirt pocket, and he could pull them out and read them during the day. Now today, President Obama gets his PDB on a secure iPad. And Robert, by the way, was instrumental in making that rather dramatic conversion, since the president and everyone around him lives on hard copy. So it was a very hard, actually it wasn't hard to sell the president, who's very IT literate. Just some of those around him were a little reluctant to give up their hard copy. But anyway, now we're all on iPads, even me. I don't know if you know this about iPads, but if you continue to add, put stuff in it, it doesn't get any heavier to carry around. And our current president is a voracious and very astute consumer of intelligence. Anyway, back to the story of the PDB and Presidents Kennedy and Johnson. President Kennedy's short intelligence bulletin was called the President's Intelligence Checklist. And of course, even then, we had to do the acronym thing, so it was called the PICKLE. It precisely met President Kennedy's needs, but President Johnson, when he became president, PICKLE didn't work for him. And the CIA realized, particularly when the CIA realized he wasn't reading it, so they developed the first President's Daily Briefing, a bigger product which gave more in-depth analysis of world events. And they delivered it in the afternoon so that the President could read it while he was lying in bed at night. They didn't know for sure whether that was going to work, until they got a note back from a senior White House aide that simply said, "The President likes this very much." Because of the PDB, President Johnson felt better informed of the driving forces behind world events at the time. And if you get a chance to read through some of the PDBs that were declassified last week, you'd see that world events include a lot more than what was happening in Vietnam and Southeast Asia, where I spent 2 of my first few years in the intelligence business. I think a lot of the students and faculty here would find these documents very interesting. And I hope they'll help people understand our work at its highest level and at its highest classification. But that's why we declassified and released them. And the idea to do that goes back to President Obama's first full day in office, when he called on the heads of executive departments to make government more open. As my good friend and colleague, CIA Director John Brennan, said last week, and I quote, "The release of these documents affirms that the world's greatest democracy doesn't keep secrets merely for secrets' sake," despite what people think. "Whenever we can shed light on the work of our government without harming national security, a very important caveat, we'll do so." And so it is with those historical PDBs. And it's true with the discussion of things we're doing now. Our transparency efforts started shortly after our current president's inauguration, but we can move faster and be more transparent. That's been one of the major takeaways for me with all the vicissitudes of what we've experienced in the last couple of years. Yes, we have to protect our secrets, our sources and methods, our tradecraft, but we have to be more transparent about the things that we can talk about, to try to correct misunderstandings and try to help people grasp what we do, and to show that we're worthy of America's trust, and to prove that we make worthwhile contributions to the security of Americans and our friends and allies around the world. And I'd like you to know, and all Americans to know, that our work is challenging, and when we make mistakes, we're always held accountable by many people. And our work, though, is absolutely critical to our national security. President Johnson once said, "A president's hardest task is not to do what's right, but to know what's right." And having worked closely with and for our current president, I can absolutely attest that statement by President Johnson still holds true. Knowing what is right is the president's hardest task. And the IC cannot make that choice ever for him, nor would we want to. But when it comes to national security, it's our job to give him the intelligence to help illuminate what he needs to decide as to what's right. So our work means a great deal to the person we call intelligence customer number one. 53 years ago, in 1962, not long after the CIA started giving President Kennedy his daily intelligence checklist, and about a year before I started my career in the intelligence business, I was an Air Force ROTC cadet at Otis Air Force Base in Massachusetts when I had the honor and privilege of meeting President Kennedy. He'd flown into the base en route to the family vacation site at Hyannisport. So they trooped out to ROTC summer camp. Cadets formed up a rope line, and I just happened to end up in the front row of the rope line when the President got off the aircraft. And there were 7 or 8 of us right up against the rope. And so he came over got off the aircraft, came over the rope line, and came through and shook our hands. So all of my fellow ROTC cadets, of course, were all going to fly. And so he was asking what aircraft they want to fly and all this sort of thing. Then he got to me, and I gave him my name, and asked me what I wanted to do in the Air Force. And I told him I wanted to be an intelligence officer. which took him aback a little bit. And then there was a brief pause, and he said, "Good, we need more like you." Clearly, then he moved on down the line, and of course that is an experience I've never forgotten. And I think it does illustrate, the impact our work has at the highest levels of government. So that's the wind-up. Here's the pitch. It's why we need the best minds our nation can produce working in our intelligence community. So I want to talk to you just a little bit here, to the students here, whether you attend Georgetown or not. The past few years in my dotage, as I approach the prospect of assisted living when I finish this job, I realize how important it is about the future of the intelligence community, and the future is about people, and people coming in to the intelligence community. So I've spent a good bit of time talking to people, young people coming into the business. I had interesting experience right now. My grandson is now in the intelligence community, which is kind of an interesting experience for me to see how somebody who's 21 years old looks at the IC versus where I see it. So anyway, the plug here is for people who want to join or are thinking about joining the intelligence community. And so the advice I give, particularly in this age of budgetary austerity, is be patient. Don't get myopic. Don't just target, I want to join agency X. You should, if you're interested in the intelligence community, apply to all of them. There are all interesting, challenging things you can do, and we're putting a lot of emphasis on joint duty, on mobility among IC employees anyway, so if you join the IC, you'll have the opportunity to move. The point is, there's interesting work to do, challenging work, rewarding work everywhere in the intelligence community. And as a contractor, I was a contractor myself for a while, working for the intelligence community. They're part of our team, and we couldn't do our mission without them. So advice point one is apply everywhere, and point two is just be patient and persevere. Our federal budget, assuming we get one, and the trajectory it's headed, I obviously make this a tough job market. I certainly recognize that, but we need you, we really do. We need math geniuses and policy gurus, and we need analysts, and we need IT experts. And of course, the educational experiences you're getting, if you're a student, that you're getting now are invaluable and will equip you in ways you probably don't realize or think about until later. That was certainly my experience when I went to college, and things that I learned as a student really helped me during my career as an intelligence officer. And if you want a career that affects our nation and our national security at the highest levels, you can't do better than the intelligence community. So that's my pitch. We could use your help, and your work will matter. So thanks for listening, and thank you all for what you do now and the work you'll continue to do for our nation. And before I end this, I want to make a quick introduction for a last-minute addition to the program, the aforementioned Hannah Powell, who is a Georgetown grad, graduating in 2006 with a bachelor's in international politics and a master's in national security studies. And during her time here, she served in student government, was an active member of the debate society, and was a great dancer. She studied abroad in Spain and completed 2 internships with the State Department and embassies overseas. Since graduating, she worked at the Defense Security Service, which was under my time as Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence, and then I brought her to my front office as a special assistant, and she later deployed to Kabul, Afghanistan for 6 months. And now she's a senior analyst in my office, which directs resources and program studies to ensure we're being as good a steward as we can be of taxpayer dollars. So I asked Hannah to come with me today to help me answer all the hard questions. But I think she's a great example of the talented and dedicated people who we have in the IC, and of course, as a Georgetown graduate, I thought it'd be a good commercial. And she's someone, by the way, that Georgetown should be very proud of. So Hannah, come on up, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, sir. Director Clapper asked me to briefly share my thoughts on working in the intelligence community. When I first arrived on the hilltop, I, not unlike many of my former classmates, had aspirations of getting into politics, even someday running for Congress. I thought that could be where I would make a difference. For a variety of reasons, I am very, very glad that I had some professors who encouraged me to look at the IC. Every day, I'm surrounded by really smart, dedicated people who honestly care about their nation, and every day, we have an impact. In my relatively short career, I've influenced multi-billion-dollar decisions, ensured troops in harm's way have received critical intelligence, and even written products that have been read by the president. You will be hard-pressed to find another place in the government or in the private sector with the breadth of opportunity found in the IC, let alone our mission and impact. And we do need you. As you've heard today, the IC is new to this whole transparency thing. It sort of runs contrary to our nature. Now, you will not find a greater champion for transparency than in the DNI, but we need your help. We need your help defining what intelligence looks like in a democratic society. This is probably the biggest problem we'll be dealing with for the rest of my career. So I hope you will consider joining us. And with that, I think Ms. Ellen McCarthy is going to come up and take a few questions.
Yeah, you sit in the middle.
Thank you, Director Clapper. Thank you, Hannah, for this opportunity to throw some questions your way. We have a lot of questions, so let's go ahead and get started. This is from somebody who asked not to be identified, but you know who he is. Is the intelligence analytic process in the IC too focused on the mechanics of the report and the production process rather than the individual customers of intelligence? If yes, what changes are needed?
Well, I think the question is essentially boils down to, do we do intel analysis and reporting and dissemination based on retail or wholesale? We have, I think, the genesis of the question is kind of something we think about here in the Beltway, where we do have more or less tailored support to senior policymakers. So each senior policymaker, obviously with the president, the vice president, national security advisor, selected key cabinet members, Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense, Homeland Security, Attorney General, principally, but others get some support. But they will get their own PD briefer, who's normally an analyst, and so they'll have this direct relationship between the principal and representative of the intelligence community, who can then respond on the spot to questions or do research or facilitate getting responses to questions that are more complex. We don't have the luxury of doing that uniformly to every customer we have, bearing in mind that the intelligence community is a global enterprise. We have many, many military users, many diplomats around the world, and many, many others who depend on the intelligence community. So we do have to do some mass production, if you will, to satisfy that large population of people out there, where we don't have the luxury of assigning them a dedicated person, dedicated analyst who engages with that policymaker on a daily basis. That's very manpower intensive, and we can only do it on a selective basis. So we try to draw a balance between the tailored support and the mass production, if you will, to serve the vast array and diversity of customers we have around the world.
Great, thank you, Director. So Hannah, It is often said that the IC's most valuable asset is its people. Yet recruitment is often a very frustrating, a long, and very opaque process, and you've gone through it much more recently than Director Clapper and I. How can the IC ensure it recruits the best candidates it can, given the competition with the private sector?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, and it's a really difficult problem, I think, for us to deal with in the IC. There's no getting around the fact that the hiring process is lengthy, and the clearance process is lengthy, and it could take 18 months for you to get a job with the IC. There are a number of initiatives to speed up the process, both within the IC and the federal government, because these problems are the same as well with the federal government. And so hopefully we're getting better at it, but I think as the director said, the key is to just be patient and persevere, because getting over it, getting through it, and getting on the other side, you're really going to have a job that has impact, and it's worth it at the end of the day. Just note that it will get better as far as competing with the private sector. Whether you go and work for industry and work for us, work within the IC as a contractor, or stay within the government, you won't get anywhere else. You won't find the mission and the impact that we have anywhere else. So I think it's worth it. It's been a fantastic place to start my career. So I just do encourage you to stick with it.
I might add to this that just statistically, the attrition rate across the intelligence community has been pretty low. Runs around 4.5%. It'll vary 1/10% from year to year, but in that vicinity, which is lower than what you typically find in industry by factor of half. And that, plus the fact that our manpower levels, which of course are set by the Congress, have been largely flat or are slightly declining. So that's not to say there isn't turnover, and there is the potential, but that was the reason for my commercial to widen your aperture. If you are interested in intelligence as a career, there are lots of opportunities, and just don't limit yourself to just one or two. I want to go to work for CIA. Only apply everywhere. And again, given the focus on mobility, you'll have lots of opportunities once you get on. The important thing, get on, get your clearance, and then there's all kinds of possibilities.
Great. Thanks, Director. This actually was a question that was asked of an earlier panel, and our General Counsel Bob Litt actually suggested we ask it again. Will a greater understanding of the IC's role via transparency make the public less inclined to call every bad event an intelligence failure?
Probably not, truthfully. I say that because I've been on the either involved in the investigation itself or been on the receiving end of virtually every investigation in the intelligence community since and including 9/11. And I think that even if we're more transparent, we're still going to be held accountable for what people would judge to be failures. I will say, though, that I think oftentimes people don't make the distinction between mysteries and secrets. Secrets are knowable facts, mysteries are not. And I think too often we're held to the same standard for divining secrets and being clairvoyant, and there is a difference.
Okay, thanks. Hannah, so while transparency is certainly the topic of discussion today, and Director Clapper has gone out talking about the need to be more transparent and how we're clearly working that across the community, how can our junior or mid-level IC employees actually help that discussion in terms of it being such a drastic cultural shift for those of us who've been around for a while? So,
Yeah, I think from at least my perspective, you see a lot of efforts for transparency at the very top, starting with the DNI, but then sort of the new generation coming into the IC. I mean, we've embraced technology in a way that folks who've been in the community longer just haven't had the same opportunities. And so there is generally a lot of willingness to change and to speak a bit more openly about what it is we do, as opposed to just having the knee-jerk reaction of, I can't tell you anything about what work is like in the IC. So, I think some of the engagements that the director is trying to get out, where he gets out to speak to students, brings other alumni out to speak as well, and then also just continuing to look wherever possible to come in with that mindset of how can we explain this in a way that I use my mom, right? How can I explain this to my mom, and how can we talk more freely about what we do? So I think it's definitely possible. It's hard work. This is the stuff that we're trying to figure out. Intelligence means secrets, but we live in a democratic society. So it's just really exciting to have the younger workforce come in, advocate for these things, and I think we're making progress.
And Director Clapper, we have time for one more question, and we've actually gotten 3 folks who've asked a very similar question, which really gets to how concerned are you about the recent OPM breaches and the IC's ability to defend against more cyber attacks like these?
Well, it's I'm very concerned about it. Apart from all the obvious concerns about the number of citizens' personal identification that is potentially, and I have to stress the word potentially, because we don't actually know what was actually exfiltrated. So what you're hearing about is the worst case, because we cannot, we don't have enough granularity, fidelity on the forensics to determine exactly what was exfiltrated. So it's what has been portrayed, which I think is prudent and honest, is worst case. So for those in the community, intelligence community, it's obviously poses a potential risk, particularly for employees who may be undercover, when this data is out there, all this identifying data, to include a large number of fingerprint files. So it's of great concern to us. We're looking for evidence of, it's turning up someplace, which we haven't seen yet. And we've tried to do, particularly within the intelligence community, as much education in the form of videos and all kinds of information that we've tried to disseminate within the community for what to watch for and certain precautions to take. But it's of great concern.
Great. Well, with that, Director Clapper, Hannah Powell, thank you so much for taking your time today to come and speak with us. This has just been a great opportunity to get. Thank you.